both China and India, which are both major crude oil importers from the region, they are both facing risks to their energy supply. It is estimated that about 40% of China's oil import pass through the Strait of Hormuz, while roughly between 40 to 60% of India's oil imports also come from the same region. China and India, of course, they are also among the few countries whose oil tankers are currently allowed by Iran to pass through the strait. So at the same time, though, India has asked China to ease export restrictions on urea, which is a key fertilizer ingredient, to help address India's domestic shortages. Beijing, for its part, has yet to issue an official response. So I think, Sana, I want to ask you about this. What do you think has been the impact of the Iran conflict on India-China relations? I mean, from energy to fertilizer supply chain, how do you think the conflict is pushing China and India towards either more cooperation or perhaps more concern and uncertainties?
I think if I have to talk about a commonality, it's just that they're concerned about their energy security. There's vulnerability there. But I think there are parallel vulnerabilities rather than strategic convergence and an idea of India-China cooperating together. I think they both have very different interests and very different roles when it comes to Middle East and when it comes to Iran. In fact, I think China is also opposed to India's cooperation with Iran, India's presence in Chabahar port. So, we talked about South Asia and what would India would have expected from China. That's a very hypothetical question, and China is never going to do anything that is in India's favor, especially in South Asia. But a maybe less securitized role of China in both South Asia and the Middle East. So I feel that's India. I don't really see India and China cooperating together in the Iran conflict or in Middle East, for example. But I do feel that perhaps to safeguard energy security. But even if you look at the Chinese discourse right now, specifically with the energy vulnerability, what they're talking about is China has diversified and China might be less impacted. But countries such as ASEAN countries, India, South Korea will be much more impacted. So I don't really, because I feel that they might see it as a leverage and not really as an area of cooperation with respect to India. So I feel there is lack of cooperation sentiment from the Chinese side than the Indian side.
Right. So even in spite of this energy crisis, one would think that stabilization of energy supply would be one major public good that will be shared by everyone. There's still scope for zero-sum game consideration, at least on the China side, it seems. So Manoj, I want to ask you, just to extend from that point, how do you think the Iran conflict is affecting India's economic and trade policy and thinking at the moment?
Well, as just to echo what Sana just mentioned and about this questions, pulling it together, India imports about 40% of its urea abroad. And to process this, the homemade urea or the fertilizers needs liquefied natural gas and other types of mineral or the crude oils, right? So if let's say I got some data that I would like to read it out.
Yes,
as per Government of India's data that was released on March 10th this year, it says that the current stock of urea in India has only increased over the years because of the strategic imports that India has been doing. At present, there is about 61.51 lakh metric tons, that is the Indian numerical system, as compared to 50.90 lakh metric tons as compared to the last year. And overall, India's stock in fertilizers have increased to 180.12 lakh metric tons as compared to 131.79 lakh metric tons in the same period. So it shows that this was something, we do have some sort of strategic reserve. And India's request or the imports from China, it's more on like a strategic alignment rather than more like a dependency on China.
Right. All right. So it's about strategic reserve management, but not quite dependency on China yet.
Yes, exactly. Right. Because most of our urea, if you pick up the data, it's urea or fertilizers, all primarily are coming from Middle East and other parts of.
Okay. All right. And so, all right, so we covered the more economic and more trade resource front. Let's cover the more security front. And Sana, how do you think that escalation of conflict in Iran and the Middle East, how do you think that's reshaping the strategic landscape across the Indo-Pacific?
I think there is a highly likelihood that it will spill over to the Indo-Pacific as well. There's no doubt about it, as in it's just not going to be contained in one theater. We have seen already in Europe, Middle East has been going on for such a long time, and now imagine Dubai is being attacked. This is something that was unimaginable before this. The Indo-Pacific is absolutely, I say, that is the next flashpoint. And maybe China, there is a talk of China could take advantage of it when the US is distracted. But then China could also take this as an excuse of maintaining its presence in the Indian Ocean region. So naval deployment, more and more deployment. And I think it kinds of gives China an excuse that I want to have more and more naval military presence in the Indo-Pacific, even in the Middle East. So absolutely, it's not going to be contained to one region. And we in the Indo-Pacific need to be concerned about China's expanding military presence.
Right, so precisely because there's regional volatility, it could potentially give China a reason to, or perhaps pretext to expand their footprint on the security theater in the name of pacifying some international public goods.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, and on, I think, similar question with Manoj, really. We know that Beijing has been maintaining strategic tie with Iran, and meanwhile, India has been, in recent years, moving closer with US, it seems. How do you think these different alignment patterns between India and China is going to affect the relations?
Well, I would not say India's like warming up to US or China warming up to Iran. If you see India's positions, is more on strategic alignment and having that strategic autonomy based on its decisions that you can see on the ground or how India behaves. And probably if you see over the years of different conflicts, it is mostly the Indian diplomats have been successful in managing, let's say, bringing the Indian citizens out of the conflict to a larger extent, and also to like right now you just mentioned about the Indian tankers coming out of Strait of Hormuz without being attacked. So this shows that India also have a very close strategic relationship with Iran. And as we discussed about Chabar port, I think that was a major strategic angle to it. And also not to forget, like just to echo again what Sana just mentioned about Chinese military presence in the region, especially in the Middle East. Yeah. China also have a naval base in the eastern part of Africa. So that's something that gives them a much further excuse to have a larger deployment and to see and understand how the Western allies or the American-led allies are performing or monitoring in the region on Iran. Yes.
All right, so let's see where India's direction in terms of strategic autonomy and maintaining that diplomatic flexibility is going to lead to for a further involvement of the region in the years ahead. So Sana, I think we are, of course, recording this in Taiwan. So any recommendation for Taiwan, how Taiwan should be looking at this evolving India-China ties?
I think there is no need to concern, and also to follow up on the last question, I think it's all interlinked. India follows multi-alignment strategic autonomy. And it's just not linked to the Western countries, China and the Middle East. Taiwan is very much a part of it. And even if there is an easing or a thaw in relation between India and China, it doesn't mean Taiwan-India relations will be impacted. This dehyphenation that has already happened. India considers Taiwan as an important economic technological partner. India really is very keen to have more engagement with Taiwan, and I don't think whatever China says and does with respect to that, that's not going to impact India-Taiwan relations. So definitely there is no way we have to be concerned about India-Taiwan relations.
All right, that's reassuring to hear. Manoj, any final comments from you? 20 seconds.
Well, that's again, nothing to worry. Just do what we are doing and just to develop from where we are right now. And rather focus more on people-to-people connections, direct flights, have more trade and more partnerships.